So it's not uncommon during retreat that we feel disoriented. Often we remember a previous retreat and we may have a bit of a distorted memory about that, and we can romanticize it, but overlook how disorienting it was during the retreat, and then sort of remember the clarity that came afterwards, or remember the portions of retreat where we had mystical experiences or expansive experiences, and overlook that there are times when things just feel very contracted or confusing, uncomfortable, and you really don't have a sense of, where that's leading, what it means, or even how to practice. It can just sort of feel like the wheels fell off. Now, many people in this retreat may not be experiencing that or haven't experienced it. But there are certainly many that have and are, and it just feels disorienting. We can sort of forget even why we started doing this in the first place. What seemed to be important about practice. What our initial motivations were, because a lot of that can just sort of get eroded away with sustained meditation. So it's sort of like, well, my initial inclination or belief or orientation toward why I'm meditating, why I'm committing to several days of meditation and contemplation, just don't seem valid anymore. They don't make a lot of sense. The reason I thought I came here has been seen through. And that can be really disorienting. Yeah. It can, if we make too much of a narrative out of that, it can be discouraging even. But this is all narrative. This is at the cognitive level. What drives us into the depths of identity and beyond is not what we think it is by definition. And that's the beauty of this. That's why sometimes I use the term grace. There's a component of grace to this whole process. That is, if we were truly led by our drives, our beliefs, our attachments, 100%. If that's all there was to us, we wouldn't do this. It wouldn't make sense. Because we don't get anything out of it in the ways that we would normally think about achievement, success, and so forth. Or even feeling good, even immediate or instant gratification of feeling good. Putting ourselves in this situation, into this process can feel not good, uncomfortable at times, for sure. So it's a good thing that that which drives us, or that which orients us to waking up, is somewhat mysterious, if not wholly mysterious. It's a good thing. But when we start giving ourselves over to that, when that starts to really drive the bus, and this happens slowly over time. This is a gradual process over years, let's say. But when we do something like sustained meditation or a really profound inquiry for a period of time, it's punctuated by sometimes a pretty rapid deepening. And with that, it becomes very obvious that what's driving this process is not what we think it is. And I think that's pretty much at the core of that sort of disorientation that happens during retreat. It's like, I don't know how to practice anymore. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know.
You were frozen for like a minute.
Oh, I was? Okay. Thank you. Well, I assume I'm back.
You were talking about when you let something drive the bus.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, just getting everybody muted again for the recording. Okay. Yeah, so not sure what was missed. It doesn't actually matter because it's getting recorded. You can still see the talk afterward. So yeah, when we let the process, let the retreat take over. When we'll say at this instant, we'll say our true nature take over. Although even that will probably be seen through at some point. Things can get strange. That's the gist of it. Things can get confusing, disorienting, etc. But that's okay. That's just part of how this goes. That's part of the process. What to do about it? Well, hopefully your instinct is by this point to realize there's nothing that you really can do about it or that you need to do about it. It's okay. It's just how this is. If there's anything to do, it's be patient. Just relax. Don't wrestle with your experience. And just watch it settle. It will settle. It always does. It can take a day, it can take a few days, but almost invariably, once we've gone through this, we've completed retreat and moved on to whatever's next. There comes a time within a day or two where we just feel like so much gratitude that we put ourselves through this, even though it was challenging, even though it was disorienting. So it's just part of the process. It's lawful. It goes this way, and it's okay that it goes this way. Another analogy would be when we sit in meditation for hours on end, days on end, it's kind of like stirring up the muck from the bottom, like in a body of water. It can be very hard to see. We lose our normal orientations, our usual orientations. But as the muck settles and the water clarifies again, we find new orientations, more subtle orientations. We find orientations that are not based on what we know, what we understand, how we think things need to go, but rather based on a sort of transcendent or prajna wisdom. And that is an adjustment. As I mentioned earlier, it can take years to really feel settled in this place where there is no particular orientation. There is no particular framework for reality. And yet there's a total naturalness to it. There's a truth to it that's undeniable, the signature of truth. And that's what we're doing here. That's what's attuning all of us to deeper introspection, to a more surrendered position. So if you find yourself in this disoriented place, it's okay. There's nothing to sort out. There's nothing to figure out. Just give it some time. Be patient. And when you leave retreat, don't get too busy trying to reorient to the old orientations, meaning the habits, the distractions that are your usual go-to when you feel a little uncomfortable and disoriented. See if you can give them a rest and just let this settle. Sit, natural meditation, spend time in nature, have a lot of quiet time, rest. Don't engage in unnecessary distractions or intense conversations, philosophical discussions, things like that, things that put you in your mind or in your head. Stay in the body to the degree you can, and this will all settle. It always does. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. In one sense, you could say that the one thing we really don't want to feel is disoriented in the way the mind likes to be oriented. The mind likes to know what's what, where I'm going, where I came from, what's real, what's not real, what's true, what's not true. And sometimes we'll trade significant discomfort for the illusion of orientation, the illusion of knowing what's what. Because especially with the initial movement of realization, to let go of those orientations of the mind is a sort of death. That first big movement, that first big shift feels quite like a death in a certain way. Certainly when you're approaching it. Beyond the gate, it's not so much like death. It's just quite different. Fluid, vast, indescribable, and also intimate and totally natural, and just this. But the barrier of orientation, the barrier of knowledge, concept, who I know I am, who I'm sure I am, and subsequently how I know the world is, how other people are, how spirituality is, all of it. That takes a big hit. It is seen through. It's seen to be not the case, not how it actually is. So to the part of you that knows no boundaries, that knows no fixation, that's completely natural. That's just right, lawful. It's the only way it could be. It's the only thing that makes sense. But to the part of you that wants to divide reality up into mine and yours, before and after, right and wrong, true and false, it's very uncomfortable. So there's these two parts of us, we could say, two parts of our identity, perhaps, that at least at first in this process, there's a bit of a struggle between them. One wants to assert itself, and then the other one does assert itself in a big way. But the seeming limited identity, the seeming sense of separate self, even when it's seen to be false, even when it's seen to be just not the case, the components of it, such as reactivity, dualistic constructs, don't just disappear overnight. They kind of wax and wane, they come and go. And this is the deeper work of the realization process, looking directly into the beliefs surrounding those identity structures. This is what we're going to be doing once this, the effects of this retreat settle. What are you going to be doing a few days from now, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, in practice or in the evolution of this unbinding for you in your life, in real terms, in practical terms? How do you proceed from the 100-foot pole in your life? So some of that is, or a lot of that is what you have to figure out. No one can tell you that. No teacher can tell you that. No enlightened person can tell you that. You have to sort it out. But that's good. It's a good thing. Because in the same way, only you can live your life in the practical, relative sense. Only you wake up the way you wake up in the relative. And that's a beautiful thing. You do have to find your own way in various ways. But you do it for all sentient beings. Because even if you don't ever explain it to anyone or talk about it to anyone, it has an energetic signature to it. The way you move through life will carry that, will carry the signature of freedom, truth, and unbinding, and it will affect those around you, even if you don't know it, and even if they don't know it. So it's good that you have to find your own way through. Now, with that said, of course, there are practical considerations, practical inquiries. And a lot of it, I would say the majority of it, is one form or another of emotion work, of shadow work. And at the bottom of all of that, in the deep shadow, there's this fear of helplessness, The moment you recognized yourself as a distinct entity when you were less than 2 years old, there was a simultaneous fear or a seed of fear that was planted that you have to protect yourself in this vast world of others, of events that could potentially harm you. And when we come back in contact with that in deeper stages of realization, it can feel incredibly raw, unguarded, vulnerable. I would say everyone I know of that moves through deep stage realization experiences this in one form or another, but by this time it's usually pretty clear what it is. And this description I'm using would be pretty consistent among most people, that you just recognize this fundamental fear of helplessness. Once you have a will, and once you have a sense or belief that's more than just a belief, it's a deep-seated feeling that goes to the bottom of what you take yourself to be, that you're separate in a world of separate objects, people, situations, then you are at the mercy of conditions. And that's the scary thing to the mental apparatus that perceives itself as separate. So when we come in contact with this fundamental helplessness or perception of helplessness, depending on whether you're taking yourself to be something distinct, something apart, something that's bound by time and space, to the degree that that attachment is still there, there will be a kind of fundamental fear response. And that's very natural. And the tendency around this, the energetic tendency around this, is something I'll just call restlessness, where we feel like the most fundamental, let's say, choice we have is to say no, to push away, to back into the internal world called me, where I can imagine things to be different than they are. And all the rest is built upon that. But it's a fundamental sense of, let's say, just aversion to experience, not even to particular people or situations, but to the fundamental experience of being anything, to even being in form. And it's just a little bit of it's a very innocent thing initially. It's a very, very simple, subtle, energetic movement of pulling back in just a little bit into a self. And you could say that that translates to something that just says no to experience. It says, no, it could be a different way than it is. To use the analogy I use sometimes of the reflective mind, it's like making a reflection of what is. And in a reflection, everything's backwards. And in one way of saying it, you could say that the whole self structure is a sort of backward reflection of, let's call it the unconditioned. Because in the unconditioned, there is no formed view of anything. But in the reflection, there's views trying to be formed all the time. There's no particular continuity because there isn't anything moving from moment to moment. And yet, in the reflected mind, there is a time scape. There's a past, there's immediate past, there's a distant past, there's a present. Strangely, we don't really look at that, because if we look too closely, we'll see even that doesn't make sense. But there's an immediate future, there's a distant future. It feels like that. It looks like that at a pretty fundamental level of thought. But that's a reflection. It's a reflection of that which has no timescape. And solidity and space, form, space, perception, solidity are all intertwined experiences. So that is something that does not exist in what we might call the unconditioned. But the reflection of that is sort of the opposite. It says there is space, perception, form, distance. So again, it's a bit of rejection of reality. That's that fundamental sense of subtle self that comes into being, or apparently comes into being. So again, at the bottom of the whole cascade of emotion, fears, anger, pushing, pulling, struggle, reactivity, most or all of that can subside, and there's still this fundamental sense of the one that fears not being, or the one that wants to say no to what is. And at this level, once layer after layer of self-structure has been dissolved, the formula is very simple, is to reverse that. To say no when there's no self-structure left is really uncomfortable. To say no to anything, even at very subtle levels. It's very uncomfortable, and you'll feel it directly. It'll feel like you're punching yourself in the face, energetically speaking. It's just really uncomfortable. Now, there's no one doing that. And at this level, you know there's no one doing that. There's no agent. There's not even a sense of separation anymore. And there's no sense of even self anymore. And yet the tendency is strong to resist. But the beauty of it is once all of those self-structures are out of the way, that resistance tendency will correct itself pretty quickly, or far more quickly than it could with any self-structure remaining. And that's simply because it's uncomfortable. And you can finally see that it's uncomfortable. It's always been uncomfortable, but we bury the discomfort of the illusion of separation. We bury it under layer after layer after layer of identity and the narrative. Once we're at the level of this internal world, internal self, this cognitive self, fully formed self. Once we're at that layer of experience, there's no direct knowing of this, and yet there's this sometimes underlying feeling that things are just not okay, no matter what's happening. We call that suffering, and that's a good thing that it's there. And that fear of suffering, that's why it's so fleeting. Of like, what is that? What is dukkha? What is unsatisfactoriness? I know it's here, but what the heck is it? It's really not until many, or if not all of those layers of identity are stripped away that we see directly what it is. It's our tendency to say no. It's our tendency to reject. So when we talk about like desire and aversion, I would say, in my experience, desire is definitely secondary. Aversion is the primary delusion. Aversion. Okay, I'm just looking at some comments here because it's the last talk and I can see what. Is the fear of going crazy just a form of the fundamental fear? It is, totally. So when we get close to a sort of major unbinding, and this happens at different levels, but the big one, usually the first one, is with this initial awakening, when we really learn to stop the mind, or we learn that we can stop the mind, or that we can disidentify from every single thought, and the mind gets very quiet. That usually leads, when you first encounter it, to a kind of fear response. The fear response, the physiologic fear response, is a physical experience, a visceral experience. And it's a sensation, or a collection of sensations, quite intense. And if you're not used to it, it can be quite surprising. Now, that's the physical experience. Now there's a cognitive, relational aspect to it, and everyone is going to be a little different with this. If you've really gotten to the point where you're disidentifying from thoughts, then you won't be doing this anymore. You'll realize any thought about what this fear response means is also a thought, and you can just let those go. But often the first time you encounter it, those thoughts will catch you because you're not used to them. And they're thoughts like, they're usually in a few categories. I'm going to go crazy is one of them, right? Another one is I'm going to, well, it could kill me. Like I feel a sort of death, imminent death, and moving through this barrier, or remaining quiet in the mind, not grasping a thought or concept, that could kill me. Because again, the mind interprets this as a sort of death. Another form of it is often, I'll abandon my family. right? I have kids. I need to take care of my kids. Who will I be without whatever, my thoughts, right? Those are probably the most common forms. I won't be able to take care of myself or my family by working or something like that. I'll become dysfunctional or non-functional. So those are the common forms I see, and they're pretty darn common. I would say most people have those sorts of thoughts. Again, some people by this time have realized like, oh, okay, every form of a thought is really just a thought. And you've disidentified to the point where you realize that those thoughts are not defining you. It's literally the mind making almost random, generating random thoughts. But when the fear kicks in, they're going to be fearful thoughts. And if you want to personify it as the ego, you're going to say the ego is going to like hit you where it hurts. It's going to try to get your attention by saying this thing that you're the most afraid of. That's what's going to happen if you stay silent in the mind, if you don't grasp another thought, right? So those are very common, for sure, common concerns. That's a great question. When we feel the aversion tendency in daily life, what's the best approach? Just to notice and feel it? Primarily, yes. And it's also very practical. Like, look at how you are perceiving things. Look at how you're communicating to others and how you're communicating to yourself. Just look at complaining. If you're complaining a lot, if you feel like everything's a problem, really look at that and say, is it? Where's my sense of dissatisfaction arising right now? Is it an emotion? Is it just is it a sensation I can just drop into? Or you can work with it at the level of belief. I have a belief that shouldn't be that way. That person should not do what they're doing. Well, is it true? Is that, can you be sure of that? Should they or should they not? Like, how can you know that, right? Or see it that you're just using that to orient. It's easy to orient to something not being the way you think it should be. That's an easy way to orient, because if you see everything and feel everything the way it should be, there's literally nothing to think about anymore. The mind goes quiet, right? It doesn't give you anything to think about if you just move, effortlessly with the flow of life. But if you look at it as a way it could be that it's not, then you have to form a mental construct about that, right? Or if you look at it in a way that it is, but shouldn't be, same thing. You have to form a mental construct. Does that make sense? So just see, oh, okay, when I'm perceiving things aren't the way they should be, is that true about reality? Or is that a statement about the formations in my mind right now? Which one's more true? So yeah, just looking at your own self-talk, look at how you communicate with others. What do you spend your time talking about? How do you actually see the world in very simple, practical terms? Can be really helpful. Yeah. And realizing that some things like habits, like complaining, can be a really uncomfortable habit. And we don't always realize it. We get in the habit of doing it a lot. Just notice if you're around certain people and you complain about certain things, if you do that enough, it starts to feel really uncomfortable in that environment. And you're all contributing to it, of course, but just see, there could be a totally different way of going about this, not complaining, seeing that things are just the way they are and they're perfectly okay the way they are, Also, it's a more empowering way to think, of course, because you think of solutions when you're not constantly focused on problems and so forth. But really practically is how I would address that. How does this relate to working towards social justice? Yeah, that's a great question. I think the more clearly you see things, not seeing them as they should be or could be, but as they actually are, I think I trust and I see it in my own experience, and I really believe it even on a scale of things that I'm not involved in, like social justice on a big scale, or working with larger organizations and things like that. The more clearly you see the way things actually are, the more likely you are to be able to make change. That's how I think it really is, actually. And the more opposition you bring to something, the more, say if there's a sense of opposition, then there's already something you're opposed to. There's another side. Could be another political position. It could be another person or organization, right? Or group. The more you feel opposed to that, the more that's going to dig its heels in one way or another. Yeah, that's just how I see it. So if you really want to make a headway in life, in a challenging situation, really, really get good at seeing the other side as well as your own side. That'll change a lot of things. That'll ease a lot of resistance to change at all levels, I think. That's number one. Number two is Accept the fact that the world is the way it is. It's imperfect. It is the way it is. Nature is not what humans would call utopia, right? Because things kill other things and eat them. We could say nature's violent in many ways from human standards. So be willing to see that the world is the way it is already. And to overlay a utopia on top of it is kind of a delusive, right? You got to start with the way things are and see them how they are, not how they should be or could be. And by seeing them how they are, compassion will naturally come forth, I think. That's how I see it. Oh my gosh, so many comments and questions. It's a good time for them, though, because I really wanted to just talk about how to bring this into daily life, how to step forward from the 100-foot pole. Social justice is be the change. And of course, yeah, absolutely. I really believe that about anything along the lines of social justice, how to be a better person in the world, how to change, injustices of the world, all that. It's great. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But first, second, and third thing you should do is change yourself. Not change yourself, but wake up. That's what I'm here to talk about. So waking up is not the cure for everything in the world, but that's what we're doing here. That's what we're talking about. And so I find that in every area of your life, whether it's becoming a better artist, becoming a better family member, becoming better at affecting change through social justice, all of it is benefited by your own waking up to your true nature, which means shedding your false nature, which is your dualistic nature. And your dualistic nature will always see the world in a dualistic way. Yeah. Yes, 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 yes. How do you work on the shadow and work with it? Okay, that's a great question. The shadow. Well, the shadow, let's just be simple about it and pretend we don't know anything about this. And I'll pretend I don't know anything about it because I don't. The shadow is, by definition, and very simply, it's what you don't see, right? If the sun is casting a shadow, you can see the sun, you can see what's in front of you, but the shadow's behind you. To me, it's largely unconscious until at least an initial awakening, but hold that lightly. That just means that after that initial awakening, it doesn't mean you're special and doesn't mean you're exalted. It's quite the opposite. You can't not see your shadow then. You're often very surprised about how much shadow material there is. One really good example of this that I see it again and again is fear, right? So before awakening, often people feel fearless. They feel quite fearless, but it's a really strange trick that the identified mind can play where it really does block you from your own experiencing of the fear that you already have. It gets like turned into something else, and there's a sort of numbness there. So many people don't think they fear death, and they don't think they have a lot of fears. And then after awakening, they're surprised how much fear they actually feel. Fear driving down the road, fear riding a bike. Like you just look at things, you're like, that could kill me right now. That could kill me right now. And in the past, you could easily rationalize it. You could, if that was uncomfortable, you could just think something different. Oh, well, I probably won't, I'm safe. I'm whatever. Like the mind can just wander off and avoid emotion. And we don't realize how much that's actually happening until after awakening. With an awakening, it feels quite blissful and enjoyable for quite a while, for a few months. And all of a sudden, man, those emotions are quite intense. And that's a really good way to do shadow work, is scrape away a layer of identity that prevents you from feeling what's there. So a lot of what's in the shadow, or the vast majority of what's in the shadow, really is repressed emotion. Now, that doesn't mean there's anything fundamentally wrong with emotion. There's not at all. It's the repressed nature of it. The fact that we form an identity to keep it in the shadow. We form an identity, a view that looks this way so that we don't look this way, right? Now, in deeper stages of realization, the tendency to even form views dissolves. We'd stop forming views of reality in reference to a seeming central self. When that stops happening, then you can't avoid anything. It can be quite daunting, depending on how much shadow material is there, but it's liberating, and it also feels quite natural. It's okay this way, but it's also like, holy cow, like this stuff is so strong, right? And things that come up that you never even knew you had in you, shame, guilt, resentment, these things tend to come knocking at your door. So when in the realization process, that's what I mean by shadow work. you certainly can do it outside of this process or in adjunctive ways with this process through inquiry, through therapy, through somatic practices that get you into touch with your body and the energetics of the body. So I'm an advocate for it anytime. But if you're inclined to wake up, I would always kind of keep the awakening process and the direct insights primary, and just know that you can't overlook shadow work. And when it comes, you have to address it, is how I would say it. Because you can get distracted with the idea of doing shadow work as well. You can get distracted with the idea of working through trauma. You can get distracted with the idea of endlessly looking through your beliefs and your emotions and reliving things over and over and over. And it can just become a bigger part of your narrative. So they do awakening and shadow work and emotion work and healing modalities. They do go hand in hand, and you can't go through the awakening process properly, in my opinion, and completely avoid any kind of emotion or shadow work. To just take what to just take the insight with first awakening that really I am not my narrative. I am not my past. There is no past. There's no future. I'm not anything I believe about myself. But to take that and then try to solidify it, to grab that like absolute perspective and try to solidify it into a belief system that can make it so you never feel anything, that's a really bad idea. It really doesn't work in the long term, but you can fool yourself with it in the short term, and you can fool other people with it. Probably a good marketing strategy if you want to try it, but I don't recommend it. Yeah. Yep. I mean, you just have to, someone said at one point, my therapist cautioned me from continuing to look in the rearview mirror. And that's true. And that's why I said just a moment ago, let the insight lead, your direct insight, and continue to look into the identity structure in the realization process. Make that primary, and then the shadow stuff will come when it needs to, and address it when it's there. But don't identify with it either, right? There's no need to do that. It's more just about clear seeing. Feel what's there to feel, see what's there to see, be willing to inquire into the beliefs around it, including why you're engaged in it at all, and let it settle. It should settle. And yeah, you can definitely form an identity around looking in the rearview mirror, which isn't helpful either. I think there has to be a balance with this stuff, and there really is a value to the middle way. So. Subject object inquiry. Okay. So the experience of being, so first of all, if someone hasn't gone through an initial awakening, it's going to be pretty hard to dissolve that. Although I have on rare occasion heard of someone who kind of has a first awakening where the subject object experience just goes away. That's very rare though. The subject object experience is the feeling, the simple direct perception right now that you're sitting there, and the computer screen's in front of your face, and that over here's a clock, and over here's a chair, and over there's a dog, and the walls are over there, and I'm definitely in here. There's something here. It may not even be a person. It may be consciousness or awareness. It could even be a sort of universal awareness that's aware of objects, physical objects. If that experience is ongoing, then you can start to investigate why you believe it, or why it feels that way, or why it looks that way. But you have to look in the experience itself, not cognitively at all. So this is definitely not an understanding thing. Logically, every day of the week, your mind is going to convince you again that, well, yeah, there's an object over there and I'm over here. I can reach out and grab it. I can pick it up and move it. I can turn around and walk away and that object stays over there. So it's not part of me, right? That's the way the mind will think about it. But the immediate experience of it can be undermined till it's obvious that it's actually not that way. And when it's undermined, what's funny is it's more obvious by far. It's just simply obvious that it was never that way and could never be that way. So yeah, there's no logic to this, really, but it can be directly addressed and dissolved. The illusion of subject and object, or self and other, or relationality is another way of saying it. Good questions. Okay. What is the right balance between surrender and effort? Well, you have to find the balance, but like I said in my book, there is a balance to find there. Knowing that too much effort, too much doership, too much agency, too much, I can control my experience through practice and through, precise insights and understanding, will become a fixation. And it is a fixation in people, even in deeper realization sometimes. On the other hand, the surrender aspect, or the not doing anything ever aspect, can be a hindrance on the other side of things. What's really fascinating about this to me is how in traditional, at least Japanese Zen, it's like the schools of Zen are kind of broken up that way, like Soto and Renzai. They're exactly the opposite in that way. There are certainly commonalities, of course, but the Soto side of things is sort of how Dogen describes it, is like, you already are Buddha nature. Sit there and be Buddha nature. That's it. There's nothing to strive for, but they do strongly advocate practice. On the Renzai side, it's like, well, fat lot of good it does to you for someone to tell you you're Buddha nature and believe it. You need to wake up to it, so work on it. Here's a koan, stop the mind. It's a very direct, hands-on approach. I don't think either one's right or wrong. And I'm sure I know there are deeply realized people on both sides of that, but either side could be a fixation for an individual, depending on how you're hooked up and what you tend toward as far as your beliefs and so forth. So what I find in this process is to get an attunement for when there is a feeling of fixation anywhere. Fixation in the relative, a fixation in the absolute, a fixation in the masculine, a fixation in the feminine. You have to go to all those places. You could also say this kind of relates to shadow work. Usually it's something in the shadow. It's something in the emotion body that we don't want to experience that keeps some kind of gravity there to have that subjective pull, or there's some gravity to keep us from dissolving a certain view. But once we learn to dissolve views as such, we tend to find these hidden places often, and we start to get an attunement for when fixation seems to be forming. And when fixation's forming, that's where our attention goes fully, because there's no fixation in the unconditioned. So it starts to feel simultaneously like unnatural in some way. It's not really that way. But also there's a sort of unconditional love that forms around that, where it's like, oh, but I want to feel it fully. I want to see what's actually there. And that simultaneity of curiosity, innocence, and an attunement to unsatisfactoriness all together will bring you right to where that fixation point is. Whether it's in the emotion body, can be a simple perceptual filter, something that's been overlooked, can be anything. So the more that happens, the more that balance is naturally struck between intention and surrender, between practice and natural meditation or non-practice even. Yeah. Can there be peace with what is while still identifying with a separate self? Wish I could have everyone vote on that one. I'm going to say no, but there will be periods of peace for sure. There can be quite a bit of relative peace even with like non-dual realization, where there's not a sense of separation. Well, then the sense of a separate self is gone by then. But the subtle self sense can still be there. But ultimately, no. There can even still be a lot of sort of dissatisfaction after the subtle self sense collapses, but it's not really a personal standpoint. It's not a personal viewpoint or anything like that. It's just the remnants of the discord with life. As I was kind of talking about earlier on, it's that binary sense of yes or no, still just saying no to life somehow. And that will dissolve after the self structures dissolve. Maybe instead of effort, stick with curiosity. Yeah, that's true. Curiosity is very valuable, and innocent curiosity and alertness, as I was talking about a few days ago. If you have that curiosity, alertness, and you're not holding a view, then there'll be times when you're going to realize effort needs to be applied. You're going to see something that's like sticky. You're wanting to go around it, effortlessly, but something needs to be looked at. You may need to do a little inquiry, right? So be open to the possibility that you'll have to apply effort. Because if you're fixating in, I don't want to do anything, I don't want to have any effort, I want awakening to just be the way it is, and there's no one there to wake up, and it just happens or it doesn't, then that's a fixation, right? Something in you doesn't want to look at something, probably. So be open to that as well. This is a good one. How do you know so well about how ego mind works when you have been fully awake so long? Would think how it works is a distant memory for you. How it feels to be inside a separate self is very much a distant memory, to the point where it's a little hard for me to know how it feels anymore, to be honest. But to be really direct about the question, I don't even know where these words come from. I literally have no clue. I don't think about this stuff. I don't even know. And so if this works for you, great. If it doesn't, well, then you shouldn't be listening to me. That's that simple. I don't even know why I say what I say. I just say it. I don't know what I'm going to say when I start a talk. That's the funny part. Almost ever. Sometimes I do, but. Which practices are best for triggering that initial awakening? Boy, that's a really good question. It really depends on the person. Some people are so oriented to surrender. They're just ready to let go into their own instinct. And it's usually people who've had a very difficult life, often a lot of trauma, or just a really not enjoyable life. Because then what's there to hold on to? Why not let go into your deeper instinct, into the unknown, the unbound? Why wouldn't you, right? They just often didn't have anyone tell them to go there. Like, look right there. That's where I want you to go, if you want to go there. And then it's like, oh, wow, no one ever told me. No one gave me permission to do that. So some people, it's just that. That's it. There's no technique. There's no practice. Or techniques can be a little bit helpful, but generally it's really about letting go. But that's not everyone. Some people are very set up to work at it. They really want to practice. They want to work hard. They want to, if someone is that way and they're very intellectual, I would say moo. Moo is a really good practice. Whether you want to do that on your own or with a teacher or whatever, you can certainly take that up with a Renzai Zen teacher. But I think it's very powerful because it's so one-pointed. But even moo can be a little bit daunting at first if you're very intellectual, because the mind just can't do anything with it, at all. There's literally nothing you can do with it. But if you learn to concentrate your attention, you learn to, develop a certain degree of samadhi, then you can sort of become one with moo. You start to feel what it means to for there just to be moo, moo, moo. It turns the mind off. It just renders it completely inert. And then you can follow that all the way in. It will carry you in to this radical absorption, So that's like a one-pointed approach. That's, I think, good for some people who have that sort of warrior spirit, really strong work ethic, but they believe in the work ethic, that I have to work hard for this. Then work hard for it. That's great. Here's how you do it. And intellectualizing that. So I think moo's really good for that, or a one-pointed approach. And then self-inquiry, it also works for a lot of people, or inquiry into the nature of thought and consciousness, as I describe in my book. So those are the kind of 4 ways I see it happening, if I'm going to categorize them. Now, there's a lot of overlap. There's even overlap with all of those. In fact, you could say all 4 of those methods literally come to the exact same point at some point. Yeah. Okay, I'll take a couple more questions. I think we're finishing up here. Oh, yes, there you go. I really didn't know till today that I needed to have permission that I can go wherever I want to. It feels so liberating. Isn't that crazy? it seems like an absurd thing to even have to say, right? And yet it's not like that someone ever told you not to go there. It's just that everywhere that you've learned to go from the time we were raised, because we live in a world of people who are mind identified, we're taught not to go, we're taught not to go there by going somewhere else. And that's into your mind. You're taught about time, effort, fear, all of it, right? Separation, like our language is drenched in it. The ways we learn to think about ourselves, talk about ourselves, the ways we learn to repress emotion, we don't even learn that overtly. We learn it through emotional impressioning, empathic impressioning, and so forth from our families. So we're pointed in every direction but there, like with all of the communications, both overt and subtle, right? And so, yeah, it's just giving yourself permission. And sometimes someone else can say it to you, and then you can go, wow, I can go there. Yeah, go there. That's what I'm talking about. That's all I'm ever talking about really here. And it is very liberating, very liberating. Okay, Violet's going to read a poem to close us out. Give me 1 minute here. Samadhi, meditative concentration. There are different stages and levels of samadhi and that sort of thing. You know, the contentless nature will get more like magnified as samadhi deepens. Okay. All right, everybody. So, any advice and practice to deepen realization? And my whole YouTube channel, literally, pretty much. Everything deepens realization. Even listening to talks on First Awakening, on unbinding. Listen to Papaji. He's really good at pointing that kind of stuff. Do emotion work. Look into the subject-object construct. Look into formlessness. Yeah. Yep. Okay, thank you, everyone. I would thank everyone and say hi personally, but there's 300 people, so we can't. It would take like 2 hours. I really appreciate everybody's effort and participation and poems. I think there's one more poem thing I have to get up, one more link, but I'll get all the links up before too long. Man, you guys have been awesome. Yeah, and thank you all the questioners. They were really good questions. So good. Wonderful. It's been good having you all in my house. I know, right? Feel like we've kind of all been in the same place. We kind of all are in the same place. Thank you all so much. Yeah, I really, really appreciate it. All of your effort, time, struggle, letting go. I do wish you all fruition. Keep at it. Okay, we're going to have Violet finish this off with a poem. I love all the hearts. You guys are so lovely.
It's so fast. I'm trying to look at all the different comments. It's like
I love it. It's just a stream of love.
making me dizzy, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
So
Thank
cool.
you all. Okay, so I had my poems open, my poem collection open just from last night's poetry, and I stumbled upon this one. And I was just cleaning up my desktop, and I thought, that's a cool one to read. So thank you for Angela for letting me read one last time to the group. Thank you guys all for everything. Okay, so this one is called Mouse, written in 2019. For now here, I do not know where. It's so obvious, though, to thee, an empty, yet embodied me. I laugh a little each time. This empty space of infinite silence, from somewhere comes this love in the form of a rhyme. I cannot say it's me, nor is there somewhere a me. Fictitious and fleeting, an illusion of space and a beautiful concept of time. I am the disguise of the enchantment of a person, and I am where what cannot be disguised. The void of vivid presence pervades the concepts of what experience can and cannot arise. and begins to turn to dust. And in that, where would I arrive? A mind erased of time, a simple dance, a wicked chance, not mine, and yet so intimate. I am undone of masks and makeup, naked in the streets. I am also the masks and the one telling the jokes. I am the chaos of the streaming and stirred mind. I am the silence echoing into the bucket. I cannot be convinced, conveyed, or convicted. I am the silence, and yet the dance of sound. I am the sensations, one, but never found. And when I awake in the morning of the sunset, it is of my mistake. Nothing is not perfect, and exactly as it should be. The burden of our stumble and the arms that reach out to catch. The perfection of the stillness, and what is to be already, and what isn't is already too. And where in that is this you? I seem a silly to find a far more curious mouse moving through this empty house. And he is here and only for seeking at its stare. I to you, don't you see how untouched thought disappears and how emotion wears itself out? Soon to not pay attention, for far more than a chaotic mind can conquer. The perfect stillness, this brilliant aliveness, isness, and that, to be at peace. For no place where non-duality is and duality isn't. For a world of concept to be, this spacious expanse, yet such a close and intimate dance.
Thanks to everyone. See you next
Thank you.
time.
See ya.